Hey everyone, this is Jeff Alberts,
Brian Miner,
Alberto Nunez,
Brad Loomis,
and Eric Helms.
and this is the 3D Muscle Journey podcast, where we bring you world-class coaching and evidence-based education for the natural bodybuilding community.
Hey gang, I got a question for you, but first, a tale from Brad's record books. I remember when I first started like getting into the literature and I was reading about different studies, and I remember reading about the anabolic window. You guys probably remember the post-workout anabolic window. You had a half an hour that you could do this, and you had an hour that you could do this, and you had 90 minutes that you could do this. And man, I was all into this. I had these two studies that said you want to get these post-workout carbs, and then an hour later, you want to lock it in with this and this and this. And I was religious about that. My life literally revolved around my post-workout anabolic window because I had this research here that was in the American College of Sports Medicine's journal. And then I remember getting into a debate with a gentleman that came into my gym and paid the drop-in fee. And the guy was absolutely jacked. He was absolutely huge. And I think he was getting done with his training. He was getting ready to head out. And I told him, we better go down to the steakhouse down here and get our post-workout meal in. And he's like, I'll worry about that when it happens. And we got in this little debate about, but then, here I'm saying the evidence says this, and you got to have it. And he's like, well, I mean, that all sounds fine, but I've been doing this for 25 years and I never did any of that stuff. And I think the evidence shows on me that what I've been doing seems to be working, and I didn't have a leg to stand on. I had my evidence that was in the book, you know what I mean? Then he had his evidence, which was basically in the trenches, kind of call it anecdotal evidence. And I couldn't dispute it. What am I going to tell him?
You should have told him, bro, I got 15-inch arms. That's my evidence.
Well, and the only thing I could think of, and I didn't really have the guts to say it, is like, well, you would be more jacked now if you would have been following the post-anabolic window, kind of evidence that I was following and having it, rule my life for a while. But I mean, that would have been a pointless endeavor, But here we had two very almost polarizing sources of evidence. They both basically had their merits in their work. So then it just kind of led me after that to kind of like question, what the hell does evidence even mean? So with that being said, Berto, you've had a couple of really interesting personal vlogs talking about evidence in the science-based space. And I kind of want to get your take on that. Your take on, well, you know what? This is what I feel is evidence. This is how I use evidence. How relative is it? I really kind of want to, because you've had some great stuff, and I have a feeling that not everybody has been able to absorb that. And I really kind of want you to take the microphone here, take the pulpit, so to speak, and talk about how you kind of define evidence and use the science-based versus your personal anecdotal evidence.
I'm just kind of open to learning from, all sources that kind of make sense, right? So I've, for example, presented with Cliff Wilson before, and that was dope. Like, just like I was absorbing it, because there's a lot of things that perspectives, ideas, patterns that we've seen as coaches that are very similar, but there's also some things that, he's seen that maybe I haven't seen as much, or he's seen, or he's interpreted differently. But at the same time, like, as I like to call it, there's the field, that's the athletes, the second floor is the coaches, right? And then the third floor is the pencil neck geeks, right? Like, I learn from everyone. I learn from my athletes. I learn from other coaches. And the same thing with like the guys that that's literally just what they do. That's their role. They don't compete. They don't necessarily coach athletes that want to push things to some of the extreme levels that we deal with. But like to me, if it can help me do my job better, and also, you know, bodybuilding matters to me. Like, absolutely, I'm all for that. And it's no different than I've mentioned this before. And when you look at childhood like athletics, like they tell you don't specialize too early. What you need to do is, explore and then exploit is the model, right? Even though you're this kid's gonna be 6'6", it's like, hey, like no, don't cut off his like ballet, don't cut off his baseball, don't cut off these other things because it's going to teach him a whole set of many skills that will be applicable to what he ends up specializing in because both parents are tall. That's probably going to be basketball. And the same thing with this, like I view everything through like the lens of my job. So whenever, that's why I love that shirt, like the expert beginner, which to me just means like pay attention, don't fucking like skip steps, right? So whenever I take a cooking class with Cynthia, for example, or anything else, like right away, the instructor can tell that it's like I'm locked in the way I want my athletes to be locked in. And what I end up doing with whatever world I'm currently interested in, because I still do a lot of that. I still do a lot of exploring and then exploiting. And I try to bring back things with me that are of use to me in the bodybuilding world. Like, oh, I really like the way they do that thing. Like we can do a little something with that. Oh, that makes sense. That's how you guys have found a solution to this issue. Ours looks a little different, but it's kind of, it's playing out via very similar mechanisms, right? So I still exploit that model. And again, it's just having a certain level of openness to gathering data and not necessarily putting too much stock in like who it's coming from, so long as when you break apart the idea, it makes sense. So to me, when I think of evidence based, I think more holistic word for it. No one's gonna be surprised, but it's just being data driven, right? And at this point, like bodybuilding, been doing it for 26 years, coaching it for nearly as long. And the whole world, like to me, like I see bodybuilding everywhere I go. So yeah, to expand on that, like, yeah, I'm very data driven and this makes no difference if we're talking about like folks who've dedicated, you know, their life to just existing in the third floor. Like the other day, man, I listened to a podcast with like Stu Phillips. Like none of my meathead friends like know who Stu Phillips is. Right? Maybe 10 years ago they did some, but I go to my gym prodigy and no one, like I'd ask Stu for a picture, you know, and it'd be in my favorites album, just like I would with I don't know if I ran into like Jay Cutler. So so yeah, I'm just very open to learning from everyone and anyone. I'm data driven is probably the best way to describe it.
Jeff, you like to always talk about evidence-based stuff. Jump in and give your 2 cents here.
For me, it's kind of like I can see things now in hindsight because I have so much experience. But I'm gonna take you back to when I used to work at the auto plant. I worked on the floor, so I worked on the assembly line, and then the engineers are the ones that would basically kind of like design the flow of how the car should be put together. So they'd have their plans, right? Engineer would come to the floor, they would observe us work, and then they would basically just ensure we're following what that book says. Because according to the book, that was the most efficient way to put the car together. Because it's all about production. We need to put out so many cars at the end of the day. Like we need to hit numbers. So the engineer would come down, observe. If we're not following what's in the book, they would point it out. And then, because of course we're union workers, we'd be like, "F that shit." We're gonna do it the way we wanna do it because this is what it's more efficient for us. So, in a sense, like, for me, I'm left-handed, so some jobs require you to use your right hand. So sometimes I would learn to use my right hand and become efficient that way, but other times it didn't make any sense. It actually was easier for me to use my left hand. So there was conflict. There was conflict between the floor, there's conflict between the engineers, and what ended up happening was the egos on both sides prevented any type of compromise. Because I think if there was no ego and both sides are humble, I think that book could have been rewritten in a way that was probably even more efficient. Or maybe the engineers can add a little more understanding that each individual has strengths and weaknesses, and knowing how to apply that is probably going to produce better cars at the end of the day. Well, at the time, I was in my 20s and into my 30s working there, and it didn't dawn on me like, because I saw this happening in real time, and I knew, like, okay, both sides need to basically compromise. I'm like, I didn't put it together like in my bodybuilding though. Like I should be applying that to my bodybuilding because I got sucked into certain camps with bodybuilding. But now in hindsight, I'm like, man, it's kind of like Berto saying the egos get in the way. So you have like right now, people are bashing, they call them the science kids, right? Like they got the cuffs all over, they're doing all these things. And wherever they're getting it from, who knows? But it's like the science is helping us to move forward in a way if you're taking what you need from it. And I just say I see it as a tool. And it's like, when I'm training back in the 90s, like Dorian Yates, Sean Ray, Kevin Levrone, I remember just following all those guys and observing and absorbing everything that they were doing. And they're like to this day, there's little pieces of them in me that I do. Like even when I met you guys, like, okay, Berto taught me a lot about flexible dieting. Uh, Brad, you taught me a lot about deloads. Brian taught me about progressive overload. Eric taught me about all kinds of shit. His brain's like this, so I can't even like say half the stuff that he's taught me. So it's like I kind of learned to like see any and everything can be a resource. And I think when you have that humility, you allow yourself to absorb those things. And then from there, it's like now you got to explore. And this is where my evidence, because I'm a bro at heart. Like I came from the bro era. So for me to like it's been trial and error to learn more about myself, to continue to try to evolve myself and to master myself. It's like, well, how am I gonna basically know if what evidence does what? It's like you have to be very consistent with what you're doing. Because in the real world, it's hard to have a lot of consistency. There's a lot of moving parts all the time. Like it's thing about, the science and the research, everything's tightly controlled. Well, you can't tightly control everything 24/7 in your life. So you do the best job that you can and you try not to change too much shit at once so you can try to figure out what is doing what. So that's kind of how I get through like my evidence is like, okay, I need time to explore, try to keep things controlled as much as I possibly can and kind of like assess and see what those results are. Keep what's working, toss out what's not. What's not, let's try something else, keep running it. So that's kind of how I've evolved. I'm still like, and what's interesting is like I'm almost 40 years deep into this and I still don't know everything there is to know about bodybuilding. I definitely don't know all about myself yet. I'm still learning as I go. But what's interesting, when I was in my 20s, 30s, I thought I knew everything. I thought I knew. I thought I knew it works. I thought I had all figured it out. And basically, the ego got in the way. And then I would start to basically, this is what we see online now. It's like, we're bashing the science kids, bashing the bro guys. It's like you're going back and forth, bashing each other. It's like, put the walls down. You might be able to learn from one another.
Your story reminds me very much of, I just was recently watching that movie Armageddon with Bruce Willis and Ben Affleck. And in one part, they were doing a simulator where they're drilling into the asteroid. And Ben Affleck's trying to push the machine to go harder, harder, harder. And it simulates the transmission blowing up. And, Bruce Willis's character, Harry's all over him, because he's he's been in the rules, and Ben's trying to tell him, he's like, "No, your machine would be able to handle it. That's a simulator." And sure enough, by the end of the film, they're up on the asteroid trying to drill into it, and they're having all kinds of problems. And Bruce Willis is just tearing into NASA because it's like, how can your engineers possibly know more than me? I've been drilling holes in this earth for 40 years. This kind of stuff happens. We can handle this. We let me do my job. That's what your story kind of reminds me of, the engineers versus the guys that were on the job. And Brian, I kind of want to throw this your way now because you have such an eloquent way of like taking the evidence and kind of making it more so practical. I guess maybe call you a practitioner in a way. You have a marvelous way of just kind of taking the evidence and then applying it in a almost like a non-evidence, but using the evidence-based way. And I kind of want to get your take on this whole what is, evidence-based and how do we use it and where do we look for our sources?
Yeah, I like the way Berto worded this with it's data driven. I think when people hear that, sometimes they assume it's like scientific data driven.
The
But
literature, yeah.
yeah, there's different there's anecdotal data that you gather as a coach over time. There's personal data for yourself that you gather over time in terms of how you respond to certain things. If there's an exercise that looks really good on paper, but your elbows hurt after you do it every single time, like you should probably not do it. So it's just being pliable and being able to call audibles based off emerging information. I think that's ultimately kind of how I try to approach it. By definition, like evidence-based, and Eric's talked about this a lot, but it's kind of like a three-pronged concept. There's the scientific evidence, and that can be either, there's like a pyramid of weight that goes into that, meta-analytic data kind of at the top. Physiological mechanisms are closer to the bottom. And then, there's practical experience. And I think that's kind of like your ability to apply that. And then there's like client preferences. I think that's the one that a lot of people commonly overlook is like with natural bodybuilding. I tell people this all the time. It's such a slow process building muscle. Like the most efficient way needs to be one of the more enjoyable ways, because otherwise you're just not going to be in the game long enough to express your potential. So that first and foremost needs to be kind of a foundation of anything that I do, is like, does this athlete actually enjoy doing this? And there's been times where, I've written training programs that, are built off some of the guardrails that science provide, where I have to bend the rules a little, the unofficial rules a little bit in order to accommodate those preferences. But I know the athlete is going to get more out of it as a result. So it's weighing all of that, with, against one another. I think, the term science-based lifting, I think it's almost like the first prong of that evidence-based model. And that's ignoring a lot of context, on an individual level, I think. And it's ignoring decades and decades of anecdote too. There are people like Jeff, you've been training longer than all of us. And has there been any science that's come out that's radically changed the way that you've approached building muscle? It's more probably like refinement and staying mentally engaged with it than like, okay, now all of a sudden my training is 50% better, like
I
the
don't think
basics have
there's
worked.
yeah. I don't think there's been anything earth-shattering
Mhm.
over the 40 years. Like, oh, that's totally changed the game. I think it's more like you said, it's like it's refining things.
Yeah.
And if you can look at like if you look at elite natural bodybuilders, you go back 20 years, they're just as big as they are
Yeah.
now. Like the
Yeah.
size is the same. What I see, and I mean, maybe you guys can, maybe a different perspective, but I just see like athletes, like the process is more efficient and more effective. Like it's not as much of a struggle or friction. So in the conditioning level, I think is gone to a different standard. Athletes are getting leaner and leaner. So, but it's like that is an illusion because it can make you look bigger. But I think from just like as a whole, like you could go back to like WWF World Champions 25 years ago, they're just as big than they are now. So I don't think nothing has changed in regards to like, okay, all this, we got this new thing here that's like all of a sudden like, okay, these athletes are 10 pounds bigger now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It's you're taking more accurate shots with new data. It's not like that shotgun approach where say I'm going to blast chest from four different angles with four different sets, and like the stimulus has been achieved, but it could have been achieved, with a lower cost. And I think that's I think where science is helpful.
I think it's getting us there faster.
Yeah,
I
I
think.
agree.
I think it's getting us there faster and more efficient.
I agree. I think with me, the reason I mention that is I think right now, especially with the amount of information that's out there, there's a lot of paralysis by analysis with people, and it's an environment that almost breeds program hopping and changing your strategy, in which case then you don't really have any reliable data because you haven't done it long enough for to observe an outcome that normally takes months and months anyway. So it's good to kind of remind yourself, if you kind of put yourself in that category or that resonates with you, that like you're probably getting more right than you're getting wrong, even with a suboptimal plan. And again, you never know if what you're doing is 100% optimal. And what is optimal in research often isn't optimal in practice. And so you have to, weigh that data with each other. What you said, Jeff, with like the engineers and the assembly line, that resonates a lot with me because in my former career in construction, that was like I wasn't an engineer, but I was kind of the second from the top floor in terms of project management. And then it's like you go into the field and talk to these laborers, and you're just there's just this conflict, that like it's hard to relate with one another. From the management side, it's like, okay, you're trying to cut corners. From their side, they have the expertise doing this their entire life, their entire career. They know the most efficient way to do it. And so I kind of think of like like a superintendent on a construction site. They're kind of managing the field. That's sort of what coaching is. That's sort of what we are. We're like the superintendents of the bodybuilding project in a sense. And I think our job is sort of to be that middleman, that liaison between the science and the actual application. We need to make sure we're getting enough right to move the needle, but we also need to be accommodating to efficiency and preferences and people's way of doing things.
So we've established basically that, okay, we don't want to lean too far to evidence, likewise, or I guess to science-based, literature-based arena. Likewise, we don't want to lean too much, on the anecdotal kind of practical side as well. You want to kind of take all aspects is what we're kind of, getting and what we're gathering from this. So just kind of playing devil's advocate, when have you guys seen like too far leaning one way or the other actually blocks your progress, right? Where, I mean, I have on more than one occasion, and like actual names come to mind, and I am not going to say them, where when it comes to the evidence, the science-based literature, those folks seem to know everything. They knew what type of muscle fibers grew, what affected this type of muscle fiber, what affected that type of muscle fiber. Then, they had they had an answer for everything, basically, based on literature. And yet they never looked any different. And arguably their physiques were not even really that impressive. It seems like their bias towards literature, towards the academic studies, it actually blocked their ability to build a good physique because they were so biased. And that's kind of where I want to take the conversation now is when have we seen that the bias one way or the other has actually been the Achilles heel of an athlete and in hindsight, what could we do better? I know I've got my stories, but hopefully I've got gears churning in your guys' minds.
Bradley, I've seen it both ways.
I would imagine, yeah.
So, for example, the other day, there's this one science communicator out there, and I asked them, they will remain nameless, if all data gathered from this person you're working with points that you have to do something that is out of bounds from what the literature would say is best practice, would you make that move? And they said no. Mind you, they're very young, right? You can see how this is a young person's mistake. And, it was one of those like, I rest my case, Your Honor. And they didn't know what they kind of like walked into, right? But like very clear, like I break rules from this desk like all the time. And it reminds you, and this is what I was looking up, and I think a lot of folks would enjoy this. It's old school, so maybe a lot of you guys have seen this, but it's not TED. It's like the OG TED Talks, like with Mike Rowe, and it's learning from dirty jobs is the name of the YouTube video, and he speaks on these two terms, anagnorisis and peripetia, and just your life should be smothered in both these terms if you're living a genuine and curious life, I think. So you guys go check that out on your own time, but it speaks and it runs parallel to a lot of things that we're discussing here. So yeah, with this person right away, yeah, I could see that, ooh, like you were gonna eventually look back a few years later and be like, damn, was I like wrong, like very wrong. And the same thing like within, because again, it's humans being humans, like within our little evidence-based, science geek corner of the fitness industry, we do have people who kind of just bottleneck themselves, and I am like, bros, like y'all need to like venture out and learn from people outside of like your own village, like trade some data. Both of you can learn from each other. And then on the bro side of things, what I think sometimes the bros fail to notice, the ones that just all their advice, all their information, like it educates them according to them, comes from podcasts like guys with hats, beards, pump covers, and that's who they're listening to. Is that there's a good chance you're probably genetically average, at best a standard deviation away from that. Where the scientific literature really comes in handy is for entry level athletes. If you're like something else, you're not listening to that podcast. You're doing your own thing because everything works. And people don't understand the magnitude at which these high responders work. It's one thing to see Phil Heath when he is done cooking and be like, yes, he has way better genetics than everyone else. It's another thing to see Phil Heath go from a 12-year-old boy to a 14-year-old boy and be like, damn, puberty like hit you up a little differently than it did me. And then he starts playing sports and arguably an endurance-based sport and just more jacked than everyone else. And then finally dedicates himself to lifting. And mind you, the first day he's in there, like he looks better than most people who are trying to do everything, right? And they have done so for years. Dedicates a year, actually no, 6 months to lifting. And this dude is like already like in places where there's almost no amount of drugs that the average person can take to look like that. Like people don't understand these gifted athletes, anything works. Like LeBron James, age 14, was physically superior than 99% of men. This dude was 6'6", 215, could probably dunk from near the free throw line. Like, like anything works. Just get them to commit to something. But if you're entry level, like, and even if you just have simply like very good genetics, that's where I would classify myself. I have good genetics, but it kind of ends there. I can't afford to be picky about who I take information from. And I've bottlenecked myself before where it's like I've been the guy listening to the podcast, like the guys with the pump covers. I've been the guy that, hey, if it isn't these guys that absolutely don't look like they lift, and only do things per the data, just not buying into it. And at the end, like going back to my opening statements, being more data driven, more open, recognizing patterns, and then backtracking through those patterns and trying to explain them using foundational sciences. Like that has been the thing that like even Jeff was like deep into being a bro. It's like that dude tracked calories. Like that's like there's no arguing that science. Like none, right? So again, like you just can't be like fucking peaky, dude. And I've seen people both ends, blunt their career. Last thing I say on this, it's one of the reasons that I think Sean Clarita like did so well when he went to that other side, because there's been a lot of guys who have tried from the natural bodybuilding world and they haven't done as well. And I think big reason is because they were kind of like those solo guys that really didn't seek out help from anyone. Like they weren't very coachable. Again, there were these super high responders. Anything worked. Whereas like Sean like was always involved with like just bodybuilding. Like he had a collection of like good bodybuilding networks and bros around him. And especially on that side. And that's where like you really see it make sense, where like, hey, you know, he always valued coaching. He always valued using methods that made sense. And I'm speaking here more so to like our people who maybe, you know, they're anti-bro. But what got Sean there compared to these other guys was the fact that he surrounded himself with all these people who have tons of experience in the trenches working with those sort of situations. So yeah, I've muffled myself, my progress, because I swayed too much in one direction or the other direction. And I guess like wherever you sit in, it's like no matter, and this reminds me of politics, where like sometimes I will agree with someone like politically, but the way they approach that topic at hand, it's like, yeah, this rallies your troops, but it does nothing to get people who can come like, so like, who cares if you're right or we think we're right if you're just kind of alienating that other side. And I think both sides kind of do that, where it's like, oh, shut your mouth. Like I agree with you, but the only people you're like hyping up and pumping up right now are people who agree with you. Like we're not catering to them. We're trying to get these people who you can still kind of like reach out and grab and at least have them consider what we have to offer. Like those are the people we're targeting. And I think aside from bottlenecking themselves, I think a lot of people, sometimes the way they put themselves out there actually hurts the movement. Like 100%. It's like, just shut your mouth. You're making the bros run away, or you're making the scientific geeks run away. You're closing up what can be some real good dialogue here.
Wise words, yeah.
Hey, 3DMJers, this is Coach Jeff Alberts here to remind you that investing in expert guidance is one of the time-tested hallmarks of serious athletes across all sports. And for competitive athletes striving for peak performance, working with an experienced coach isn't just a luxury, it's essential. At 3D Muscle Journey, we understand the dedication it takes to reach your physique and strength goals, and we provide the programming and support to get you there effectively and sustainably. But our craft isn't just for the stage or the platform. We create career-spanning relationships with our clients to guide you along your lifting journey in a stepwise manner. We don't do quick fixes or rush transformations because those will always only be temporary. We know the art and skill of becoming an advanced lifter takes years, and we want to work with athletes who are willing to put in the time. If you want to learn more about all of our coaching plans, systems, and prices, go to our website at 3dmusclejourney.com. We offer weekly coaching for in-season competitors and bi-weekly coaching for off-season or recreational lifters. There are also 3 different time frame options for one-off video calls that each include a training program and nutrition plan every 8 to 16 weeks. Our mission is to create athletic careers for serious lifters, and our one-on-one coaching program is how we do that best. It's more than just workouts and meal plans. We deliver comprehensive support tailored to your individual needs. Don't let another training cycle pass without the expert guidance you deserve. Invest in your athletic future now and sign yourself up for coaching today at 3dmusclejourney.com. Thanks so much for listening and enjoy the rest of the show. That was kind of me. Like, I would say, I don't know, would you classify me, Berto, as good genetics?
Yeah, a few rings higher than me. Like, I think for both you and I, like, we're in that place where 6 months in, we would make a lot of grown men, like the boomers, hate on us, like the boomers of our generation, right? I guess for you, they were the boomers, right? Or for me, it was the Gen Xers. But they would hate, right? Because I remember that, like, stop it, kid, you're going to hurt yourself. Or when I was your age, bullshit, right? But not like some people. Like, again, like some people, it's like literally like 6 months in, they are,
Yeah.
they're grown men, bro. They're grown men. Like it's hard.
So-
I've seen Maurice Jones-Drew when he was 16 years old, and anyhow, yes, very good genetics, but not to the point where you can just do jack shit, or your legs would have grown when you didn't train them.
Yeah. Like, I was a high responder early on, and I didn't know anything. I didn't know what I was doing. I lifted weights heavy and hard, and I grew. Okay, great. But I think even for people who have really good genetics or even elite level genetics, why not use the science to make yourself even better? So what ends up happening is you have, and I've seen this, I'm Dorian Yates. I'm going to say my spiel, and it's right because I'm a 6-time Mr. Olympia. Like, who's to say you couldn't have been better? Or Doug Miller. He's, considered one of the best natural bodybuilders ever. It's like, who's to say you couldn't be better if maybe he explored even more? I think it's like, it's not just for entry level, it's for everybody. Like, how do you know what your ceiling is anyways? Like, you can say with 100% certainty, like, that's the best you've ever could been. Like, how do you know that? Just because you have this external trophy, this medal that says you're Mr. Olympia or you're WMBF world champion, like, maybe you have more ceiling. So why not tap into all resources to make yourself better? And I know someone will look at me like, Dorian Yates will look at me and go, what the fuck are you saying, Jeff? Who are you? That's the way they reply. Who are you? You're some godfather of natural bodybuilding? Like, really? You'd probably laugh at me. And then it'll be like, so he just basically just shuns it. Well, that was me for 16, 17 years, shunning like whoever would basically want to debate the way I approach things. Then when I met you guys, was like, okay, you need to maybe open up your mind to these other areas. And that's like, if you think about it, in my late 30s, yeah, I had pro cards. But going from my 30s to my 40s, I basically leveled up my physique. And it wasn't because all of a sudden I put on a ton more muscle. Basically, I was killing my muscle because of the approaches to my dieting, the big picture approaches. So once I learned more about the science, once I learned more about other people and their experiences, that's where I started to level myself up and continue to level up. So I don't think it's just for entry level people. I think it's for everybody. Because I think that would be
they're the ones
like,
that benefit the most, Jeff, because
yeah, no, they benefit. But I'm saying is like, let's not just like, I don't want to just say, hey, because you're above average or you're great genetics. Like, yeah, you can get away with more than the people who have lesser genetics, but keep an open mind. Like maybe you go like another 10% above what you thought was your ceiling.
I guess, well, no, I agree 100%. But I guess the reason it doesn't happen is that people don't realize that, like in bodybuilding, the majority of the people that we get incoming, it's like they started because um, there was something wrong, or they thought there was something wrong with the way they look. Like it wasn't a great base, right? And the guys that end up going to the top are the ones that like look at Kevin Levrone when he was 14. There's pictures out there of this kid. You know, he probably did a very generic weight training with his little like flag football team, and like that was it. And like, dude looks so sick, right? So a lot of these people who, like in other sports, like the sample size is so much more competitive and bigger. Like all our like bodybuilding heroes, like if all of a sudden like the NFL is like, we're quitting the NFL, too much CTE, all of you guys have to go like bodybuild, like all our heroes would be demolished like within a few years. Like Ronnie would be like couldn't even got a pro card with like these dudes, right? And but with them, because it's so competitive, like Otani's over here in the off season trying to like change little like degrees and angles in this swing that are very minuscule, and like there's just no pressure for our guys to do it. So I'm just saying like this I'm agreeing with you, Jeff, where it's just like they don't do it
I
because
think
they
we're
don't
agreeing
have
with each
to.
other.
Yeah, because they don't have to, because guess what? Like everyone, 99% of the people coming into the fitness industry just want a good before and after. We don't have we have very few freaks. Most of them rather go carry a ball for 3 to 4 years and, make 10 million and like right into the sunset.
We get all the rejects of real sports.
Literally.
Nolan Ryan.
Like people don't,
Right.
well, people don't realize that. Like people do not realize that. Like it's like, let's get rid of the tall guys, right? Because that's hard past a certain height. But like there's just no pressure to split hairs the way like Victor Wembanyama, who's a complete outlier, went to go play with Hakeem Olajuwon to get his footwork right this offseason, right? It's like there's just so again, yeah. Continue, Jeff. I'm sorry, but yeah, like people just need to be
you're
aware
good.
as to why don't emulate the best, because their target is so much bigger than yours.
And I think with the science being more useful to beginners, I think that can go both ways too. I think looking at it from more like if it would behoove a beginner to read like the just basic meta-analytic information that's out there. Like this is the general direction you want to go. This is what constitutes like a well-rounded program. Like you're probably going to see success if you do this. But what I see a lot of beginners doing that are really into the research side of it is almost focusing too much on like the mechanistic side of things rather than what's actually proven to provide outcomes. And both have their place. Don't get me wrong. Like I think, physiological mechanisms are eventually, it'd be good to be able to explain all the observations we're seeing in longitudinal data and, long-term training studies through mechanisms. Right now, we can't really do that, and some would argue that, but, I think the mechanisms give a good start to like a hypothesis on how we should train, and then we actually have to test that, and then that's what I think beginners can benefit from seeing is the outcome of that process. But the other thing too is when it comes to research, the people that are parroting research online or pointing fingers, like the people that obviously just want to be perceived as correct, like rather than just being helpful. I think that's like the litmus test for me. It's just like how do they come off? Oftentimes they're focused on research, like it's a small body of research, like just because you understand muscle physiology doesn't, like in the real world, there's a lot of confounding variables. There's other bodies of research that influence and overlap with other bodies of research. And it's like you're almost if you focus too much on mechanistic stuff, you're looking at the process in a vacuum, like this well-controlled vacuum, and it just doesn't play out that way. Um, it can give you a very good idea of where to start. Like the common example that you see online right now is like rep ranges. In terms of, higher rep ranges being more fatiguing. Like we know that. Like you're going to feel more fatigued subjectively and, in the different types of fatigue that are measured after a high rep set to failure than you would like a set of 5. But when we look at the like actual outcome data, it's like, okay, well, doesn't seem like it makes much of a difference. So like, should that be a pillar upon which we build our framework off of, and should we really be preaching that when it might have minimal difference? And if anything, that message to me, it's more restricting options rather than showing people the availability of options. And when it comes to hypertrophy specifically, like we've talked about this a lot, like it is, I wish it was more complicated than it was when it comes to like checking the boxes in terms of getting a good stimulus. But in people, I think maybe they just want to make it more complicated than it needs to be. But a lot of this shit works very well. And by sending that message, like, okay, I'm science-based, this is suboptimal, this is suboptimal, this is suboptimal, and you're a beginner hearing that, you're like, okay, now I've got 3 options of how to train this muscle group. And you kind of create this narrative in your head that like, if I don't do that, I'm suboptimal out of the gate, and I don't think that's fair. I think it's
Doing
better
something
to,
wrong. Yeah.
to provide, like expose options to people and give them the rationale into why each option can be an appropriate tool at a given time. Like if those people are training in low rep ranges and their joints start to hurt or they have orthopedic issues, like they're going to self-correct pretty quickly. They're either going to quit or they're going to realize, have the humility to acknowledge like, okay, lighter weights with higher reps have a place every now and then, It's like it's not that hard to understand why that would be. So I think I do see some of the science communicators, like the physiology science communicators specifically, they're creating more restriction than they are expanding horizons for people. And that part bothers me. But, and, there's probably as many examples of people on the other end of the spectrum that, like you guys talked about, that pay no attention to the research. I think, if you go into a gym and they've got, it's like they view exercises and machines as like these separate entities rather than like, okay, let's understand a movement pattern and realize that 3 of these machines you have in here are training the same exact thing, in the same exact way. Like that would be useful information to know. And I think it just, there's a lot of unnecessary overlap with people that aren't as in tune on like or as knowledgeable on the basics, very basic biomechanics and, and the basic physiology of things. But it's just this kind of melting pot of data that I kind of draw from personal experience and with each athlete and their, like you mentioned, Jeff, like Dorian, maybe he could have been better doing, being more open-minded in that way, but he may have hated it and in turn not pushed himself as hard, So there's always like, you have to consider like the one question leads to a next, and it's just you peel back layers. And at the end of the day, it's like we can't be certain no matter what, to me.
As far as the subject of us blocking our ability to really thrive, that's what we're all after. What is it that makes us thrive? In this thing that it is that we're doing. I can't remember who I was listening to because I was just playing it in the background as I was training in my spare bedroom over here. But there was a lot of good bro science that was coming out of kind of that kind of like mid late 90s bodybuilder before it was for me in the mid to late 90s. I didn't know that all the IFBB pros were taking steroids. I just thought that they were all genetically gifted, jacked. Just they were able to build those physiques naturally. But it was a big eye-opening experience in the early 2000s when I realized that drug use was pretty rampant. But they were doing some techniques then that we really kind of poo-pooed in the early 2000s, or late 2000, we'll just say 2003 to like 2011. There were a lot of those bodybuilders. They were training more so for the pump. They were training more so limited range of motion. You would see them doing bench presses where it's sitting on their chest, and they're just basically just moving the thing in the what we now call the lengthened um, area. Like maybe 5-6 inches. And once it became prevalent, or at least once it became well known, I should say, that drug use was very prevalent in the IFBB pro ranks, we again poo-pooed those techniques because, well, of course it's going to work. They're on drugs. Anything that they do is going to work, right? And now we've kind of come full circle, and we've kind of found out, well, you know what? A lot of those things had a lot of validity. We just poo-pooed them because A, they were on drugs, and B, we all kind of know that those kind of compounds, they speed up the effects of what it is that, actually works. So sure, with us, it might take 3 to 5 years for some particular technique to work, or to actually be measurable as far as progress goes. It was a little different back then. It just sped it all up. It would happen quicker. It would happen in like 6 months, in 8 months and things like that. The exact same technique, but because we had this bias, we shunned it. We shunned it. Oh, and that's not going to work. Everything right now shows that you need to be, full range. You need to have this volume. You need to have that volume. And so, yeah, that was kind of my little note where we had this evidence, anecdotal evidence, I guess you might say, more so on the other side, that we kind of shunned because it was an outlier. It was because of other things than actual, kind of in the trenches work. So with that, when was something that was kind of shown in evidence had a profound effect on us and how we did things and maybe how we changed things? So to give an example, like for me, the path that I was going down, kind of doing the max OT approach, the heavy training, overload, progression every week, every month, every whatever. I think that probably would have taken me to a road to where I would have eventually quit. And not because I didn't want to continue. I think I would have just tore my body up, as it is. I've torn my bicep. I've got a strain in my infraspinatus. I got a strain in my quad. I got a jacked up back and a crooked spine and everything. I think if I would have continued down that road, which was very successful, anecdotally, from what I had experienced and what I had accomplished using those techniques, I think I would have been broken. I think that would have led to where I no longer could train. And even if I did, I would be kind of almost fearful that I was going to hurt something else again. Now what's going on with Brad, And then, about the time that the muscle and strength training pyramids came out with their second edition, it opened up a whole new world of, you know what? There's more ways to make things hard than just adding load. Sure, adding load makes things harder. It drops your repetitions down. However, when it comes down to effort, is there really much of a difference? In training with 5 rep max loads to like 3s and 4s, or training with 15 rep max loads to 14, 13, or 14 repetitions. They're kind of equal, but what I found is that using the lighter loads, getting the same effort with a higher rep range, it didn't tear my body up as much. In fact, really, I kind of almost rehabbed and healed things that were straining in a way. And so I really kind of made this about face, learning about effort and learning about kind of RPE and the relative nature of RPE with loading, to where I felt like it's really given me some longevity, to where, I'm still doing this at a, I mean, for just a regular Joe, I feel like I'm doing this at a pretty high level, and I didn't tear my body up in the meantime. I'm still at it. I'm still doing it. I'm still doing 89, 92% of the stuff that I could do as far as the exercise selection goes. And here again, I'm loving the Milo Wolfs out there that are doing all of the PhDs and the learning about the stretch mediated hypertrophy and the loaded stretching and the lengthened partials and things like that. Because now it's added another another layer of how to make things hard. You know what I mean? Let's spend more time on the eccentric than the concentric. Let's load the eccentric and kind of rinse and repeat and kind of almost limit the load that I can put on the bar by just stopping at the full stretch and then rinsing and repeating over and over again. It's got me possibly decades on what I feel like would have blunted, my lifting career to where I would be that guy that is so broken. The only thing I can do is like curls, leg extensions, and, back extensions, and that's it.
Why are you talking
I'm
about
still
me?
doing 90% of the stuff that I could do before. And it saved me. It's kind of saved my joints and it saved me being able to continue doing this crazy thing that we love doing.
I think the science for me, some of the biggest benefits has just been expanding that canvas to work with. Rep ranges, knowing that I can work around aches and pains and not feel like I'm confined to, the traditional rep ranges that are in to this day still in some personal training textbooks, that categorize like the strength, the hypertrophy, and the endurance rep range. It's a spectrum, and hypertrophy just tends to overlap with all of them. Um, and I think just rather than doing like a bro split where I think I would have started to get run down with the amount of volume I was doing, just allocating that across a couple days a week, I can't say with certainty I'm any better off or I'm bigger now than I would have been continuing with the bro split, but I know I've been in the game longer because of it. And so I think, like you said, Brad, it's just allowed for more longevity on that front. But there's just mostly just the volume and rep ranges are the first thing that kind of come to mind for me, in frequency a little bit.
Yeah, I think my appreciation for, again, the foundational sciences, like, really came through when I tracked calories for the first time ever 7 or 8 years into this. I go 7. Prior to that, I'm like, that's something that, if you wanna do kind of a Weight Watchers type program, or if you have some non-extreme goals, that might be for you. My game's a little different. And very quickly, yeah, I learned that, yeah, we're in a quantum world. Like, guess what, bro? The general rules of the universe are going to apply to you. So, so yeah, that was huge. But at the same time, um, something that I've discounted, and this is where I think either the optimizers, which like half the time, it's like you guys aren't optimizing. Like, you guys are just kind of stuck in that one corner again, just with your crew, or I guess biohackers or whatever. But they look at, for example, like the standard recommendations of the government gives people when it comes to like health, like with fruits, vegetables, exercise, um, brushing your teeth, stuff like that. And they dog on it, and it's like, no, no, like, we need like more of this. Because in hindsight, like, if I would have followed a lot more of this just simple foundational stuff, like a lot of the stuff that like the pyramids like promotes, like in the non-extreme dosages for a very long time, I legit think 80-90% of like my current results would have been achievable. Training 3 days a week with the bottom end of the protein intake, you know, like, very just like casual, but like, over time, just like investing more often than not. Um, And I wish, I guess, science would do that a little more for folks, right? Because sometimes I think both tribes kind of man and Brian's kind of hinted at this. It's like no, like actually, it's a tight fit. It's a tight fit if you want to be optimal. Um, and that's the furthest thing from the truth when it comes to this. Like, when we go to WMBF Worlds in a few weeks here, like everyone like got there in like pretty different ways. Most of the time is how it goes. But there's some common themes, and again, those are those things that go back to like the core basics. Like that's what we do have in common when you like extract them to their like lowest common denominator. So where I think like I guess both sides kind of lose me. I think people lose sight of this is that, to some extent everything about you is kind of fabricated. Like every day we wake up and we decide to follow through with this avatar we committed to be. Like people don't realize, like you wake up and you are trying to do things to protect that scared child that you are at the end, from the clothes you pick, how you interact with the world, your general survival strategy. And with this comes like personal taste and pleasures. And I think when it comes to like this lifting thing, it's kind of like decorating an office. Like Cynthia absolutely hates how, and I say this affectionately, how mildly autistic like my office is. Because there's not a whole lot here. Like I don't need much. Like this thing, God bless her soul, because she got me that thing, but like she wanted it up there, and I'm like, yeah, I got to put it up there because she got it for me, and it means a lot to her, and it'll add a little extra to the office. But for me, like I don't need a whole lot. Like I do my best work. Again, in office, it looks like it belongs to like Doug Funny. I'm aging myself there, but very plain dude cartoon that attire kind of reflects that. So when it comes to your like lifting, for example, I think um like that's key. It's like I think a lot of people come to me because they want to kind of lift like me, but every once in a while, or bodybuild more like I do, and I think that's good. But sometimes I'll get people who they kind of want to, like again, this is all a big cosplay act, anyways, right? They kind of want to do it their way, and to me, it's like, hey, so long as it's kind of like within that like general spectrum of what's good, we might be a little bit off target, but guess what? I'm not going to sweat that because like, you know Brian said if Dorian trained like Ronnie and if Ronnie trained like Dorian, maybe they wouldn't be as good because there's a human element to this. So I think that's something that the scientific side kind of like everyone's playlist at the gym is often a little different because, different things arouse us and get us into that mood to, be the best as possible. So whatever sort of bodybuilding avatar you need to run around and cosplay and pretend you are to really get you into the zone and be the best you can be, like by all means do that. But I would say like recognize it at the end. Uh, just recognize that you're allowing yourself to do that, and just ensure that that doesn't get in your own way. But yeah, there's a lot of room for customizing your office so that you can do the best work. Going back to that analogy, right? Like for some people, they inherit my office. They're like, oh no, 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 like we need to like hang like these like deer heads on the wall and blah blah. Beer signs. But that's just not me. So, um, so yeah, just have fun with customizing that part. Like whatever gets you in the mood, just like your playlist. That's what it should be.
I think what science has done for me, it's given me the reasons why some of the things that I used to do, like, worked instinctively. Like, I didn't know why it worked, it just felt right. And I've told this story before already, like, when Eric basically taught us about rep cadence. Like, it doesn't matter if it's 2 seconds, 3 seconds to complete a rep, or it's up to 8 seconds. As long as you're getting close enough to failure, you're gonna get a pretty much an equal stimulus. Well, very first training session I did with Eric about 15, 16 years ago now, we were doing flat dumbbell press. I was doing like 90-pound dumbbell presses, but I was purposely slowing down my rep speed, specifically on the concentric. And in my brain, it's like it felt right. I was being controlled. So I was lifting more like a skill in a sense, and not worried about like this is like maybe hurting or helping hypertrophy. It just felt good and felt right. And he, at the time, based on what he knew at the time through the science, like you probably should have slowed down your concentrics because you're not going to recruit as much muscle fiber, which kind of made sense to me. Like if I'm throwing an object super slow, it's not going to travel very far. I'm like, okay, so maybe I need to increase my rep speeds. But now, I mean, in hindsight, like what I was doing was actually, it was correct. But at the time, I didn't know why. It just felt right. But now I have an answer as to why it works because of the science. So I think for me, it's like it helps me to understand concepts better and you know, the ins and outs of things and why it works, doesn't work. And it helps me to be like to help communicate that to the athletes that I work. I could help explain the reasons why we're probably doing things. And even if it's something that's more broy, there's probably a reason behind it. So I think that's what science does. It helps to get some answers. And those answers evolve. I'm sure they change. What we know now seems right, might be wrong in 10 years, but we'll eventually you'll have an answer because of the science. And the thing about at the time when the science was kind of pointing to volume, we need more and more volume. I explored that. It didn't work for me. All it did is beat me up. I had bad joints. I was hurting. I was aching. And so I'm like, more volume for me is counterproductive. So that's one thing about the science that I do not use for myself is like thinking of volume as like the main driver for hypertrophy because I don't think it's necessarily true for everybody. Especially as you get more advanced, more skilled, it's almost kind of the opposite. You learn to get more efficient with your volume. You don't end up needing as much as you might think.
Wrapping things all together like that, the way that you guys did it, it kind of reminds me of the way that I, a lot of times, will describe how 3D muscle journey works. It's kind of like a foundation. You know what I mean? Evidence just because something is anecdotal doesn't mean that it's excluded. It's still evidence. I've noticed this trend in myself, in my athletes, in the evidence, right? It's kind of a three-legged stool, you know, that we stand on. I mean, first of all, we're fortunate enough that, you know, I've got 30 some years. Jeff's got 40 years. Brian, you and Berto and Eric, we've got all of our years. You take all of that together, and we've got our personal evidence that we have noticed. Jeff does better with the lower volume. We can break that rule and he can thrive. And people that are like him, we can break those rules and it applies, you know, and we can take us in the trenches. That evidence that we've seen from ourselves, that's one of the legs, you know, of the kind of the foundation that 3D Muscle Journey is sitting on. The second one, of course, is the one that, you know, kind of Eric is firmly entrenched in, and that is the evidence, the academic, you know, evidence that's out there that shows this study and, you know, this meta-analysis of all these studies and, you know, all that kind of stuff. That it like you said, Jeff, it answers the questions. Why did this work back in the day? Well, it worked because, you know, we found out these mechanistic features that, you know, are conducive to hypertrophy. We've got that second leg. But then we've got that third leg that we are in a rare and fortunate situation is that we've gotten probably between us now thousands of people that we have worked with. And so we've got this huge sample size of folks that are genetically gifted, folks that are above average, gifted, folks that are average, folks that are below average. And then there's just those simple like non-responders, right? That it seems like whatever we do, they cannot seem to progress in their physique goals. So we've got like this three-legged stool that is basically all evidence. You know, we've got science, we've got us in the trenches, and then we've got what we've noticed as far as our clients goes. And it's all valid. It's all valid evidence that we kind of are able to pull from. And, you know, it's probably kind of why we are, all of us still in the sport, even though Jeff and I are in the mid 5-0s and we're helping people that are in their mid 2-0s. So Yeah, that's kind of how I would kind of put the little bow on this this little topic that we've talked about. But yeah, you guys, anything else that you feel is pertinent or we could expand upon what I talked about? Yeah, let's get it out there.
Case closed. The evidence
right.
says it.
All right. Well, thanks, guys. Thanks for joining us. And until next time.
What's going on, everybody? Eric Helms here, Chief Science Officer of 3DMJ. Thank you for listening to the podcast. And let me just take 1 second to tell you about MASS, Monthly Applications in Strength Sport. This is a monthly research review that I do with Lauren Colenso-Semple, Eric Trexler, as well as Mike Zerdos. These are experts in their field, and we cover all the information relevant to you as an athlete or coach if you're working with strength or physique athletes, or if you're a recreational or competitive athlete yourself. We cover nutrition, training, sports psychology, and health. And we do this in written format, as well as, since you like the podcast, audio summaries, as well as video concept reviews. If you're a trainer, we also have continuing education credits for ACSM, NSCA, NASM, and ACE. So head over to 3dmusclejourney.com, click on the products tab, and you can find us there. I look forward to seeing you and enjoy the podcast.